The house stood alone at the edge of the village, where the dirt road ended and tall grass began. It was a small house, built from old wood and patched tin, and it leaned slightly to one side as if tired of standing. At night, it felt even more fragile, like one strong wind could knock it down. Inside lived a young woman and her baby, and little else. The woman's name was rarely spoken now. Since her husband died, people mentioned her only in whispers, if at all. Some said she carried bad luck. Others said sorrow followed her like a shadow. She did not argue. Grief had taken her voice long ago. Each day followed the same quiet pattern. She woke before sunrise, fed her baby, cleaned what little she owned, and worked until her body felt hollow. At night, she rocked her child to sleep with slow, careful movements, afraid that if she stopped, the silence would swallow her whole. The baby was all she had left. His breathing, soft and steady, was the only sound that reminded her she was still alive. That night felt different from the start. The air was too still. No insects sang outside. No dogs barked in the distance. Even the trees seemed frozen, their leaves unmoving under the pale moon. In the village, people believed midnight was not just a time, it was a doorway. A moment when the world of the living grew thin, and unseen things could pass through. Elders warned children never to wander at that hour. Doors were locked. Lamps were dimmed. Prayers were whispered. The woman did not think of these things as she sat on her mat, cradling her baby. She was tired, so tired that her bones ached. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep. Still, she smiled down at her child, brushing her thumb across his warm cheek. "Sleep," she murmured softly, more to herself than to him. The oil lamp beside her flickered, though there was no wind. She frowned but said nothing. Old lamps behaved strangely sometimes. Then, just as the night slipped into midnight, the baby laughed. It was not a small sound. It was not a weak coo or a sleepy murmur. It was a clear, bright laugh, full and joyful, like the laugh of a child who had already learned happiness. The woman froze. Her heart jumped so hard it hurt. Babies this young did not laugh like that. Not yet. She had been told this many times by older women in the village. Laughter came later. Much later. The baby laughed again. The sound filled the room and did not fade. It seemed to stretch, bouncing off the walls, slipping into corners where shadows lived. The woman's arms tightened around her child. A strange chill crept over her skin, raising fine bumps along her arms. "Enough," she whispered, though she did not know who she was speaking to. The lamp's flame trembled wildly, then dimmed. The air turned cold, sharp enough to make her breath show faintly in front of her face. Outside, a sudden wind rushed through the tall grass, bending it low as if something unseen had passed through. The baby laughed a third time. This time the woman felt it deep in her chest. The sound did not feel playful anymore. It felt answered. She stood quickly, pressing the baby against her shoulder, her heart pounding. The house groaned softly, wood creaking under a weight that did not exist. She looked toward the door, then the window, then the dark ceiling beams above her. Nothing moved. And yet everything felt watched. The baby calmed, resting his head against her neck, his small fingers gripping her worn dress. His warmth was real, solid, human. She clung to that truth as fear crawled into her thoughts. "It's just a dream," she told herself. "You are tired. Too tired." But even as she said it, she knew the night had changed. Outside, the wind died as suddenly as it had come. The grass slowly rose again. Somewhere far away, something heavy thudded once, like a distant heartbeat, then went silent. The woman sat back down, her legs weak. She did not sleep. She watched the shadows until dawn began to soften the dark. And in the deepest part of her heart, a quiet certainty settled like a stone. Something had heard her baby's laughter. And whatever it was listening now. The woman told herself that the next night would be normal. Daylight had a way of shrinking fear. When the sun rose, the house looked small again, harmless. Birds returned to the trees. Neighbors passed on the road as if nothing strange had happened. Even the baby slept peacefully, his face soft and innocent, as though the night before had been nothing more than a bad dream. She clung to that thought all day. By evening, exhaustion weighed on her shoulders. She fed the baby, washed her hands in cold water, and lit the oil lamp as the sky darkened. The flame burned steady at first, and that calmed her. She rocked her child, humming a tune her mother once sang, slow, broken notes that felt older than words. When the baby slept, she laid him down carefully and lay beside him on the mat. Her eyes closed, though her mind stayed awake. Then midnight came. She did not hear the clock, there was none, but she felt the moment arrive. The air shifted, growing thick and heavy as if the house itself was holding its breath. That was when she heard it. A soft scratching sound rose from beneath the floor. Her eyes snapped open. She held still, listening. The sound came again, faint but clear. Scratch. Pause. Scratch. It was slow, careful, like fingers dragging across dry wood. Her heart began to race. "It's rats," she whispered. "Old houses have rats." She had heard them before years ago when her husband was still alive. But this sound was different. It did not scurry. It did not hurry. It lingered. Then came another sound, low murmurs too quiet to understand. Not words exactly. More like breath shaped by mouths that were too close to the ground. She sat up, clutching the edge of the mat. The baby stirred but did not wake. His chest rose and fell, calm and steady. The murmurs stopped. Silence pressed down again. She waited, counting her breaths. Nothing happened. Slowly she relaxed, embarrassed by her fear. She lay back down, turning her face toward the wall. A dull knock came from beneath the floor. Once, twice, 3 times. Each knock landed with a slow rhythm like a pulse. Her body went cold. She pressed her hand over her mouth to keep from crying out. Her mind searched for reason, for anything solid to hold on to. The ground shifted at night. Wood expanded and shrank. Old houses made sounds. Everyone knew that. Still she did not sleep. The sounds returned the next night. And the next. Always after midnight. Scratching. Murmurs. Knocks. Each time she told herself the same lies. Each time they felt weaker. What frightened her most was not the sounds, it was the baby. At night he changed. When the whispers began, he did not cry. He did not stir in fear. Instead he smiled. His eyes opened wide, shining in the dark, fixed on empty corners of the room. Sometimes he reached out with one small hand, fingers stretching as if someone stood just beyond her sight. "No," she whispered, pulling him close. "There's nothing there." But the baby only laughed softly, a gentle sound now like a greeting. Her blood turned to ice. Memories she had buried long ago began to rise. She remembered sitting among other women during her pregnancy, listening as the elders spoke in low, serious voices. They warned of children born during certain seasons under certain moons. Children who listened before they spoke. Children who heard the ancestors first. She had laughed then, nervous and unsure. She was young. She wanted a simple life. Superstition felt harmless when spoken in daylight. Now, she remembered the way the elders had fallen silent when they saw her belly. The way one old woman had touched her arm and whispered, "Watch the nights." She had ignored it. Fear and love pulled her in opposite directions. Every instinct told her to protect her child, to shield him from whatever crept beneath the floor. But another feeling grew alongside that fear, a terrible understanding. The sounds were not random. One night, as the whispers rose again, the baby laughed, and the knocks answered immediately, louder than before. She felt it then deep in her bones. The whispers were listening, and they were listening to him. After the whispers began, the woman stopped sleeping altogether. Her days blurred into one long stretch of exhaustion, but her nights remained sharp and bright with fear. When the sun rose, she felt almost foolish for being afraid. Yet every evening, as shadows stretched across the road and the sky darkened, her chest tightened with the same quiet dread. It was on one such morning, carrying her baby on her back, that she noticed the village cemetery. The path that passed near it was usually busy. Children ran through it. Goats wandered freely. But that day everything avoided it. A donkey refused to move forward, planting its feet into the dirt no matter how hard its owner pulled. Birds perched on nearby trees but did not sing. Even the wind seemed to curve away from the place. The woman slowed her steps. The cemetery sat on a low hill, surrounded by old stones and broken wooden markers. Many graves were neat and cared for, but others were forgotten, sunken into the earth, names worn away, offerings long gone. These were the graves people did not speak of. The disgraced, the accused, the ones buried quickly and quietly. As she drew closer, her baby stirred. He lifted his head and let out a soft laugh. Her stomach dropped. She followed his gaze and saw disturbed soil near the back of the cemetery. Fresh marks. As if the earth had been pushed from below, not dug from above. The sight made her skin prickle. She remembered stories she had heard as a child. Stories told in hushed voices when elders thought children were asleep. Tales of people wronged, of deaths never made right. Of spirits that stayed awake when the living refused to remember. She turned away quickly and hurried home, her heart pounding. That night, midnight arrived like a drumbeat. The air thickened. The lamp dimmed. The whispers beneath the floor returned, louder now, less patient. The baby did not cry. He laughed. Then from far away, A deep sound rolled through the ground. Boom, boom. It was slow and steady, like drums beaten beneath the earth. Or like a giant heart, still alive though buried long ago. The woman pressed her hand against the floor. She felt it vibrate. Tears filled her eyes, not from fear alone but from something heavier. Sadness. Anger. Pain that did not belong only to her. In her mind, old memories surfaced. She remembered how certain families in the village never spoke of their dead. How some graves had no names because names were dangerous. She remembered her father once telling her that silence was easier than truth. And then she remembered something else. Her own family had once been given land. Good land. Land that others had wanted. Land that had come after a sudden death and a rushed burial. Her breath caught. "What did we do?" she whispered into the dark. The baby laughed again, softer this time, almost kind. The drums slowed. The whispers shifted, no longer restless, but heavy with longing. She understood then that the dead were not reaching for her in anger. They were reaching past her, to the village, to the living who had forgotten them. Fear still lived inside her, but it changed shape. It became responsibility. She held her child close, rocking him as the sounds faded with the coming dawn. Outside the wind moved again. Birds sang hesitantly as if testing the air. The graves had not rested. And now neither could she. After the night at the cemetery, the woman began to notice something extraordinary about her child. He was no longer just an ordinary baby. During moments of quiet, when the wind fell still and the house seemed empty, he would lift his head and listen. His dark eyes would focus on corners where nothing seemed to exist, and his tiny hands would reach out, curling as though touching invisible threads. At first she thought it was imagination. Babies did strange things. But then the whispers beneath the floor, the soft knocks, the faint murmurs, all seemed to respond to him. When he laughed or cooed, the sounds would pause, hesitate, or change rhythm. Sometimes, when he babbled to himself, the air would tremble with quiet echoes as if someone, or something, answered. The woman felt a mixture of awe and terror. She had carried this child through sickness and fear, and now he was different. There were moments when she watched him from across the room, tears in her eyes, unsure whether to hold him tighter or let him explore the unseen world. Love battled fear in her chest every second of the night. She began to remember the old stories told by her ancestors. Stories of listeners, children born under certain moons or during specific seasons, who could hear the voices of the ancestors. Children who were neither cursed nor merely human, but bridges between worlds. Their laughter or cries could summon what was hidden. Their presence could calm or stir restless spirits. The realization frightened her. Could her child be one of these? Had she, unknowingly, brought a bridge between life and death into the world? Her fears grew heavier when neighbors began noticing odd things near her home. A goat would refuse to graze, circling the yard endlessly. Shadows seemed thicker around her door. Some villagers whispered that strange sounds echoed from her house late at night. The woman would see curious eyes peeking from behind curtains, feel unspoken suspicion in the air. Yet she could not tell anyone the truth. How could she explain that her baby's laughter woke something buried, something restless? How could she share the fear that he could listen to voices no one else could hear? So she kept it hidden. She spoke to the baby softly, warning him to stay calm, to rest. She prayed quietly, asking for protection, for guidance, for a chance to understand what her child was meant to do. But silence became impossible. One night, as the wind rose and the lamps flickered, the baby lifted his tiny head and laughed, bright, clear, and impossible. The whispers beneath the floor responded instantly, soft but urgent. Then a low thumping began in the ground, not steady like before, but irregular, almost pleading. The woman felt her pulse quicken. She pressed the baby to her chest, rocking him gently, whispering promises she barely believed herself. The sounds were no longer random. They listened. They responded. And they were waiting for him. Her fear shifted again, this time into a quiet determination. If her child could hear the dead, if he could be the bridge between worlds, she could not hide from it any longer. She had to understand. She had to guide him. The baby's small hand reached up, brushing her cheek, and she saw a calm certainty in his dark eyes, a certainty that no ordinary child could hold. It was as if he knew he had a purpose, one she did not yet fully understand. And in that moment the woman realized the truth. The night had changed forever, and so had she. Her child was no longer just a baby to protect. He was a child who could hear what others could not, and the world would never be silent again. The changes at her home did not remain private for long. At first it was subtle. A neighbor mentioned hearing strange noises late at night. A goat disappeared for a few hours only to return trembling. Crops near her fence wilted for no reason. Birds avoided her yard. Nothing could be proven, and yet everyone felt it. Something had shifted, and they feared it. Whispers spread quickly. Women spoke in hushed tones about the baby who laughed at midnight. Men shook their heads, muttering about curses and bad omens. Even the elders, normally slow to act, began to question the child's birth. Had she in some way broken the natural order? Had the ancestors been angered? The woman felt their eyes on her wherever she went. Walking to the well, she sensed someone following her, then vanishing when she looked back. At the market, hands turned away from hers. Small children hid behind mothers' skirts. Words were seldom spoken aloud, but the fear was loud. And then the village began to suffer. Crops failed along the outer fields. Chickens stopped laying eggs. A strange fever moved quietly from house to house. Livestock panicked in the middle of the night, breaking free and trampling gardens. The villagers were desperate, and desperation always needs a target. Soon the blame came to her. Her child? Someone muttered. It is the cause of all this. Leave them alone, they are innocent. Another voice tried to argue, but it was weak. Fear drowned reason. The elders gathered in the village square. They debated quietly, their faces grave. The child's birth, they said, might have violated spiritual laws. Perhaps she had been careless, or perhaps fate had singled her out. One by one they mentioned old stories, stories she had long tried to forget, of children who could see the unseen. Some of those children brought ruin to entire families. She felt the weight of isolation pressing down. Women avoided her gaze, men muttered as she passed. Her friends no longer spoke, afraid to be associated with her and the child. Even the small kindnesses of neighbors, sharing firewood, water, or a borrowed pot, stopped. Still she did not leave. She would not abandon her baby to superstition. Love held her in place. But anger and fear buzzed in her mind, twisting with her grief. Why must the living be cruel, she wondered, when the dead could not yet rest? Her resolve began to grow stronger. She could feel it in the way she held her child close at night, in the small, quiet rituals she began. Lighting extra lamps, speaking to him softly, asking for understanding instead of protection. If the dead would not be ignored, then perhaps she could act as a guide. If the living would not see the truth, she would stand between both worlds. The nights became harder. The whispers beneath the floor came with more urgency. The distant drums in the cemetery beat louder. And now, with every flicker of a lamp or draft that swept through the house, she could feel the pressure of both sides. The eyes of the living, judging, accusing, fearing, and the presence of the dead, restless and waiting for acknowledgement. She held her child tighter, whispering promises she barely understood herself. I will protect you. I will learn. I will not hide. And in the silence that followed, she realized something she could no longer deny. The dead were growing louder, and the living, blinded by fear, were becoming crueler. The village had turned its eyes on her. But she would not turn away. The woman stopped fighting the nights. At first, she had tried to block the sounds, covering her ears, whispering prayers, rocking her baby faster and faster until her arms ached. But fear only made the whispers stronger. Now she did something different. She listened. It began with dreams. When she slept, she no longer dreamed of her husband or her old life. Instead, she dreamed of places she had never seen but somehow knew. Narrow paths through tall grass. Hands digging into dry earth. Faces blurred by time, mouths opening as if to speak but never forming words. She woke each morning with tears on her face and a heaviness in her chest that did not fade with daylight. At night, the baby slept peacefully beside her. When the whispers rose beneath the floor, he did not laugh anymore. He listened. His eyes stayed open, calm and dark, as if he understood every sound. When she watched him closely, she noticed something new. The whispers softened when she stayed still. They grew louder when she panicked. Slowly, painfully, understanding began to take shape. The dead were not screaming. They were calling. One night, as the house settled into silence after midnight, a strange warmth spread through the room. The cold that usually crept along the floor did not come. The air felt thick, almost gentle. The baby reached out, his fingers opening and closing slowly, as if touching something unseen. Then the images came, not dreams this time, but waking memories that were not her own. She saw a young man kneeling in the dirt, his hands tied. She felt fear rush through her body, sharp and desperate. She saw a group of villagers standing back, faces turned away. She felt betrayal burn through her chest. She gasped and pressed her hand to her heart. Another image followed. A woman crying over an unmarked grave. A voice silenced because it spoke too loudly. A truth buried because it was inconvenient. The woman understood then. The spirits were not seeking revenge. They wanted to be remembered. They wanted their stories told, their names spoken, their deaths made right. They wanted the living to admit what had been done and stop pretending the past was clean. Her own grief rose to meet theirs. She thought of her husband, buried properly but forgotten too quickly. She thought of how pain, when ignored, only grows heavier. The dead were carrying the same weight she carried every day. Her breath shook as another truth surfaced, one she had tried to avoid. Her family had benefited from silence. The land her father had farmed. The house she lived in now. They had come from a time of confusion, of rushed decisions, of people removed so others could stay. No one had spoken of it openly, but everyone had known. And no one had questioned it. Tears streamed down her face as guilt settled into her bones. Not guilt for something she had done, but guilt for something she had inherited and never questioned. "I didn't know," she whispered into the dark. The whispers answered, not with anger but with sorrow. She felt it then, clear and undeniable. The dead were not punishing her child. They were using him because he could hear them. Because he was open. Because he had not learned silence yet. The baby turned toward her and rested his head against her chest. His breathing was slow and steady. He was not afraid. He trusted her. That trust broke something open inside her. "I hear you," she said softly, her voice trembling. "I will not pretend you never lived." The ground beneath the house seemed to sigh. The whispers eased just a little. From that night on, the pattern became clear. When she acknowledged the presence, when she spoke aloud, when she remembered, the unrest softened. When she ignored it, the sounds returned stronger than before. Forgiveness, she realized, was not something the dead could give on their own. It had to begin with truth. She would have to speak the names that were buried. She would have to face the village and uncover what they had hidden. She would have to admit that peace could not be built on silence. The thought terrified her more than the whispers ever had. The village had already turned against her. What would happen when she told them they were wrong? When she reminded them of what they had chosen to forget? She looked down at her child, sleeping peacefully in her arms. "I won't let you carry this alone," she promised. Outside, the night held its breath. Somewhere beneath the earth, the dead waited, not in rage but in hope. And the woman understood at last what they were asking for. Not blood, not sacrifice, but truth, and the courage to speak it. The woman had never felt so small, and yet so certain. The nights had grown heavier. The whispers beneath the floor came with a new urgency, pounding softly but insistently, like a heartbeat that would not stop. The distant drums from the cemetery rolled through the earth with every midnight, reminding her that the dead were not patient. They were waiting for acknowledgement, for recognition, for someone to act. Her child, once small and fragile, now carried a presence that seemed larger than the house itself. His laughter, soft, gentle now, spoke of understanding and purpose. When he cooed in the darkness, the whispers would pause as if listening closely. She could feel that he was guiding her, showing her what had to be done, even if she was terrified of what the cost might be. The village's judgment had grown louder during the day. Crops failed. Animals panicked. Illness spread. The people needed a reason for their suffering, and their eyes turned to her. Mothers shook their heads. Children whispered. The elders, once silent in contemplation, now muttered about banishment, about curses, about what must be done to restore balance. She could flee. She could leave the village and hide in the forests beyond, carrying her baby as far as her tired legs would take her. She could find safety in isolation, away from judgment and blame. But every instinct inside her refused. The whispers beneath the floor reminded her of the dead. The drums from the cemetery reminded her of the unrest she had stirred, not by her fault, but by the truths she had ignored. Her child had a role, a purpose, and she could not deny it. If she ran, she would abandon more than a village. She would abandon the balance between the living and the dead. The choice lay before her, clear and impossible. Protect her child by hiding from the world, or face the village, face the spirits, and face the consequences of truth. Midnight came. She felt it in the air, the sharp shift, the quiet pressure, the way shadows stretched too long across the walls. The baby laughed, not with fear or mischief, but with calm certainty, as if telling her that he was ready. The whispers beneath the floor swelled. The earth thrummed with a deep, insistent pulse. The dead were restless. They were counting on her. And the village would not wait forever. Soon they would act. The elders would demand ritual cleansing. Some feared sacrifice. Others would push her and her child from the village, casting them into the night with nothing but fear and hope to guide them. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heartbeat against her palm. Fear was strong, nearly overwhelming, but it was no longer the only force in her mind. Love burned brighter. Responsibility weighed heavier. Courage rose, unbidden, from some hidden place she had not known existed. Her arms tightened around her baby. She breathed in the warmth of his small body, the steady rise and fall of his chest. She whispered a promise to him, quiet enough for only the two of them to hear. "I will not run. I will not hide. I will do what must be done." The night seemed to pause. The wind held its breath. The lamp flickered once and steadied as if approving her decision. Then she stepped outside. The earth was cool beneath her feet. The cemetery's drumbeat echoed faintly on the wind. Shadows swayed with the moonlight. Every eye in the village seemed to turn toward her, though she did not look back. Her child laughed again, a soft, guiding sound, and she felt the truth of it in her bones. The dead were waiting. The living were watching. And she had chosen to stand between them. There was no turning back. The woman inhaled deeply, bracing herself for what would come. Fear still lingered, but it was balanced by something stronger: determination. With the baby cradled in her arms, she walked into the night willingly, ready to meet whatever awaited her, living or dead. The night was heavy with expectation. The woman stood at the edge of the cemetery, the baby cradled against her chest, his small warmth grounding her. Midnight had arrived with a quiet, unrelenting pressure. The air was still, unnaturally still, and the shadows seemed deeper than the moonlight could reach. Even the wind had paused, as if the world itself was waiting. From somewhere beneath the earth, she felt the faint drumbeat, the slow, steady pulse of unrest. The whispers beneath her house had become voices in the soil, calling out, stretching toward the surface, pressing for acknowledgement. This was not anger. This was longing, sorrow, the quiet grief of lives that had been ignored. She knelt on the soft ground, her knees sinking into the cold dirt, and held her baby close. His eyes were open, shining in the darkness, fixed on places no one else could see. He was calm, as if the presence of the unseen world was as natural to him as the rising of the moon. The woman took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past press against her chest. She spoke, her voice trembling but clear. "I see you. I hear you. I will not forget you." The ground shivered lightly beneath her feet. The whispers answered, moving through the soil like wind through reeds. She felt memories brushing against her mind, faces, hands, voices, all reaching toward her. People whose names had been silenced, whose deaths had been unspoken. She saw injustices, old grudges, quick burials, and quiet betrayals. Tears blurred her vision, but she did not move. She could feel the presence of her ancestors, and of those the village had tried to erase. She whispered their names aloud, one after another, letting each syllable fall into the night, carrying the weight of remembrance. The baby laughed softly. It was not a laughing of mischief, but a gentle sound, guiding her, affirming her actions. The whispers softened. The drumbeat slowed, and the ground beneath her feet stopped vibrating. In the stillness she realized something profound. Forgiveness was not the gift of the dead. They had already given it. Peace could only come through acknowledgement, through truth, and through courage. Her child had been the bridge. He had been the one to listen when she could not. He had been the one to guide her hands, her voice, her heart toward what was right. She looked up at the pale moon, feeling the weight of both worlds pressing down on her. And then she did something she had avoided for so long. She spoke the truth aloud for the living as well. She told the village everything she had learned, everything she had remembered, and everything her child had made her see. She did not blame. She did not accuse. She only spoke what had been hidden for far too long. The air seemed to shift. A soft wind stirred the grass, carrying her words into the village. Somewhere a door creaked open. A child laughed nervously in the distance. A goat bleated, hesitant but unharmed. The living had heard, and some understood, though fear lingered like smoke in a closed room. And then, finally, silence. The whispers faded. The drumbeat ceased. Even the shadows seemed to breathe easier. The woman felt it, the first moment in weeks where the dead had finally found rest, and where her child could sleep without being called upon. She lowered her baby to the ground. He wiggled, cooing, reaching for the night as if it were a friend. She stroked his hair and whispered a quiet thanks, feeling the enormity of what had passed between them. The night was still, but it no longer carried fear. It carried understanding. It carried balance. And in that delicate, fragile quiet, she knew that the reckoning was complete, not because the living had fully accepted it, but because the truth had been spoken, because acknowledgement had been given, and because the bridge between worlds had finally been recognized. Her child laughed one last time into the night, a soft, haunting sound that promised hope. The dead had spoken. The living had listened. And at last the world felt at peace. The nights grew quiet. It was a quiet that felt strange at first, almost too heavy with absence. The whispers beneath the floor had stopped. The faint thumps and distant drumbeats from the cemetery no longer pulsed through the earth. Even the wind seemed gentler, sighing softly through the trees instead of cutting through with cold fingers. The woman lay awake beside her baby, listening to the steady rise and fall of his chest. For the first time in weeks, his breathing was undisturbed by unseen voices. His laughter had softened into gentle, sleepy coos, like tiny reminders of life untouched by fear or sorrow. She let herself relax, pressing her cheek to his soft hair, feeling a small, fragile joy return to her chest. Outside, the village began to breathe again as well. Animals grazed quietly. Chickens clucked softly in the yard. Birds returned to the trees and sang tentative, cautious songs. The land itself seemed lighter, as if the weight of unspoken grief had lifted. The villagers moved more slowly at first, their eyes wary. Some spoke in hushed tones about the events of the past weeks, while others avoided mention entirely. But slowly, reflection replaced fear. Mothers and fathers remembered the stories of the children who had been silenced, the lives forgotten, the wrongs that had never been addressed. They began to understand, not fully but enough. The woman wandered through her home, tidying what little she owned. Every object felt heavier now, laden with the weight of history and memory. She paused at the small offering she had placed beside the baby's crib, whispered acknowledgments to those who had passed unremembered, and felt a quiet satisfaction settle in her chest. She mourned what had been lost, the old life, the innocence of sleep, the comfort of not knowing the dead were near. But she also felt lighter, freer than she had in weeks. The burden she had carried, the responsibility for bridging worlds, for speaking truths long hidden, had finally been honored. The graves outside her home, once disturbed and restless, were now still. She had visited them during the day, setting small stones and offerings, whispering names and stories. Even though she did not know, she spoke for, giving them acknowledgement they had been denied. And as the sun fell behind the hills, she sensed it, the dead had finally slept. Her baby stirred in his crib, blinking slowly in the lamp's soft glow. She smiled down at him, brushing his hair back from his face. The quiet was no longer ominous. It was peaceful. The village, too, began to heal. The fear that had spread like wildfire faded. Conversations returned to daily life. Crops began to thrive again. The small tragedies of life continued, but without the shadow that had haunted them for weeks. The woman felt a shift within herself, too. She had faced fear, embraced responsibility, and accepted the truths that others refused to see. She had protected her child, guided the restless spirits, and in doing so, allowed both worlds to find balance. That night, she sat quietly by the window, her baby sleeping at her side, and allowed herself to imagine a future where the dead could rest, the living could learn, and laughter, real, innocent laughter, could fill the house without summons or fear. The world had changed, subtly but profoundly. And in that change, she found the first true peace she had known since the nights of the first laughter. For the first time in weeks, she slept. And when she awoke, the world outside was quieter, gentler, and waiting for the life that would continue after the storm. The dead had rested. The living had remembered. And she, a mother who had braved fear and truth alike, had survived, and so had her child. Time passed, slow and steady, like a river reclaiming its course. The village, once tense with fear and suspicion, settled into a quiet rhythm. Life returned, though nothing remained quite the same. People spoke more carefully now, listening to one another, remembering that what is unseen is not always malevolent, and that the past, when ignored, can haunt the living. The child grew. His laughter, once the harbinger of restless spirits, became a symbol of something entirely different: hope, renewal, and remembrance. At night, he slept soundly, unafraid of the dark corners of the house, unshaken by the earth beneath it. When he laughed, it was simple, joyful, full of the innocence a child should have, yet layered with the wisdom of someone who had heard truths no adult could ignore. The woman watched him from her mat, her heart both full and fragile. She had lived through fear, grief, and the relentless demands of the unseen. She had faced the villagers' whispers, the dead's longing, and her own guilt. And now, she looked upon her child and saw not just the baby who had changed the night, but the bridge he had become, a living reminder that love, courage, and acknowledgement could heal even the deepest wounds. The villagers began to share stories again, stories that had been silenced for generations. They spoke of the injustices of the past, of the children who had been lost, of the quiet wrongs that had shaped their community. And always they spoke with reverence for the child who had made them remember, for the woman who had faced fear and carried truth into the night. Midnight no longer brought fear. It carried memory. It carried respect for the lives that had been forgotten and hope for those still living. Some children laughed simply because they were happy. Others, like this one, laughed because they remembered. The woman held her child in the soft light of the lamp, watching as he stretched and yawned. He looked at her, eyes bright, and reached for her face with a tiny hand. She smiled, brushing his hair back, feeling the quiet strength of what they had endured together. Outside, the village slept peacefully. The graves, once restless and haunted, were finally at ease. The wind whispered softly through the trees, carrying with it a sense of balance restored. The world had not returned to its old innocence. It could not, but it had moved forward. And in that movement there was grace. The child yawned again and drifted into sleep, his chest rising and falling with quiet certainty. The woman leaned back, breathing deeply, feeling the weight of the long nights finally lift. She understood now what the elders had meant when they spoke of listeners, of bridges, of the delicate threads between life and death. Her child had not just laughed in the night. He had changed it. And in the stillness that followed, the woman felt it. The legacy of courage, love, and truth would live on, whispered from parent to child, from one generation to the next. Some nights would carry shadows. Some nights would carry silence. But this night, and every night after, carried a quiet, haunting peace, a promise that the living could honor the dead without fear, and that even the smallest voices could shift the balance of the world. She held him close, feeling the warmth of life, the strength of memory, and the quiet miracle of survival. The night was theirs now, and it would never be the same again.